The lipstick on Grace's coffee mug wasn't her shade. I'd been married to the woman for 12 years, watched her apply that same boring beige every morning like clockwork, and this crimson smear screaming back at me from our kitchen sink sure as hell wasn't hers. 3:15 a.m. I should have been asleep, but insomnia had become my closest companion lately. Grace lay upstairs, probably dreaming of her next church committee meeting or whatever passed for excitement in her perfectly curated life. Me? I was standing in our kitchen in boxers and a ratty Metallica shirt, staring at evidence that my wife was either experimenting with makeup or entertaining guests while I was at work. The rational part of my brain, the part that fixed leaky pipes and rewired faulty outlets for a living, suggested she'd borrowed lipstick from one of her church friends. Sandy, maybe, or that gossipy Marge. But my gut, honed by 43 years of life's little disappointments, whispered something darker. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Eddie Barrow, by the way, handyman by trade, skeptic by nature, and apparently husband to a woman who'd started wearing mystery lipstick. I fix things for a living: broken faucets, busted electrical panels, marriages that leak trust, like old pipes, leak water. Turns out, some things can't be fixed with duct tape and determination. Grace had been different lately. Distant. She'd started taking her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. Her Bible study weekends had multiplied like rabbits in spring, and now this lipstick, bold as sin in our pristine white sink. I rinsed the mug. Grace would wake up in 4 hours, shower with her usual military precision, apply her beige armor, and head off to her job at Morrison Insurance, where she managed human resources with the compassion of a tax auditor. She'd kiss my cheek, always the same spot, always the same pressure, and remind me to fix the loose board on the back porch. But first, I had some investigating to do. Our bedroom looked like a magazine spread. Grace insisted on hospital corners, matching pillows, and a comforter that cost more than my monthly beer budget. I'd learned to sleep on my designated side without disturbing the aesthetic. Tonight, though, I had bigger concerns than thread count. Her purse sat on the dresser, black leather, and organized within an inch of its life. Grace kept everything in its place: receipts in the front pocket, cards in their slots, phone in the special compartment. I'd watched her organize it 1,000 times, the ritual as familiar as morning coffee. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. 12 years of marriage, and I'd never snooped through her things. Grace valued privacy the way other people valued oxygen. But that lipstick had changed something fundamental, shifted the ground beneath my feet. The receipts told a story I didn't want to read. Dinner at Romano's, our anniversary restaurant, on a Tuesday when I'd been working late at the Henderson renovation. A hotel charge from 3 weeks ago, when she'd claimed to be visiting her sister in Portland. Gas receipts from the other side of town, where she had no business being. And then, wedged behind her insurance card, I found something that made my blood run cold: a business card for Derek Owens Real Estate, with a phone number written in Grace's careful handwriting. Derek Owens. I knew that name. Knew the man, actually. We'd gone to high school together back when he was just another punk with more attitude than sense. He'd left town after graduation, supposedly to make his fortune in Boston real estate. Word was he'd come back 6 months ago, divorced and looking to rebuild his life in familiar territory. Word was also that he'd been sniffing around the church, playing the reformed bad boy angle for all it was worth. Grace had mentioned him exactly once in passing, when Pastor Glenn had asked the congregation to welcome new members. Derek Owens joined today, she'd said over Sunday pot roast. Says he's found God and wants to give back to the community. I'd grunted something non-committal and asked her to pass the potatoes. Now I wished I'd paid more attention. The business card felt heavy in my hands, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to face. but Grace's phone, charging on her nightstand, promised answers I needed. She'd changed her passcode. For 8 years, it had been our anniversary, 0624. Simple, predictable, very Grace. Now the screen flashed red with each failed attempt. I tried her birthday, my birthday, even our address. Nothing. That's when I noticed the second phone. It was wedged between the mattress and box spring on her side of the bed, a cheap burner phone that had no business being in our bedroom. My hands trembled as I powered it on, dreading what I might find. The text history made my stomach lurch. Grace. Can't wait to see you tonight. Eddie's working late again. Derek. Same place? I'll bring protection this time. Grace. Good. Last time was too risky. What if someone from church saw us? Derek. Relax, babe. Your husband's too stupid to figure it out. Besides, we're consenting adults. Grace. Don't call him stupid. He's simple. There's a difference. The messages went back weeks. Detailed plans, explicit promises, casual cruelty that cut deeper than any knife. Grace, my wife of 12 years, discussing me like I was a particularly dim pet that might soil the carpet if left unattended. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at evidence of my wife's betrayal, and felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. Not heartbreak. That would come later. This was something else. Something calculating and patient and very, very angry. Grace stirred beside me, murmuring something in her sleep. In the darkness, she looked like the woman I'd married. Young, innocent, full of dreams about white picket fences and Sunday dinners. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who could lie to my face while planning her next rendezvous with Derek Owens. I slipped the phone back into its hiding place and returned to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled to life at 4:30, same as always. By the time Grace came downstairs at 6:15, I was sitting at our table, reading the morning paper and sipping coffee like nothing had changed. Morning, honey, she said, pecking my cheek with practiced precision. Sleep well? Like a baby, I lied, watching her move through her morning routine. Coffee, toast, vitamins arranged in a neat line. Everything in its place, including the husband who was apparently too simple to notice his wife's infidelity. I might be late tonight, she said, not meeting my eyes. Budget meeting ran long yesterday and we need to finish the quarterly reports. Sure thing, I said. I'll grab dinner at Murphy's. She smiled, the same smile she'd given me for 12 years. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the careful management of a man she considered too stupid to threaten her secret life. After she left, I sat in our kitchen for a long time, staring at the spot where that crimson lipstick had announced the end of my marriage. Grace thought she was so clever, so careful. She'd underestimated one crucial factor. I might be simple, but I wasn't stupid, and I sure as hell wasn't going down without a fight. The game had changed. Grace just didn't know it yet. Sunday morning in Millbrook, Maine, meant one thing. Everyone who mattered would be at First Methodist by 10:30 sharp. Grace had been primping for an hour, applying her armor of respectability with the precision of a surgeon. Today she'd chosen a navy dress that screamed, pillar of the community, and pearls that whispered, trustworthy Christian woman. If only they knew what I knew. I'd spent the week gathering evidence like a man collecting kindling for a bonfire. More hotel receipts, more text messages on that hidden phone, photos Derek had sent that made my skin crawl, not because they were explicit, but because Grace had responded with enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her in years. You ready, Eddie? Grace called from the hallway mirror, adjusting those pearls for the 5th time. We don't want to be late. Coming, dear, I replied, slipping a manila folder into my jacket pocket. Inside were printouts of the most damning messages, carefully selected for maximum impact. I wasn't planning to use them today, not yet, but carrying them felt like wearing armor into battle. First Methodist Church of Millbrook sat on the town square like a monument to small-town values. White clapboard siding, tall windows, and a bell tower that had called the faithful to worship for over a century. Grace loved this place, loved the way people nodded respectfully when she walked down the aisle, loved her position on the women's auxiliary and her reputation as Pastor Glenn's right hand. That reputation was about to become very expensive. We took our usual pew, third row from the front on the right side. Grace preferred to be seen, to nod graciously at the other congregants like some kind of religious royalty. Today she was especially animated, whispering greetings to Marge Patterson, the pastor's wife, and Sandy Morrison, her closest friend and biggest enabler. "Grace, you look lovely this morning," Marge gushed, leaning across the aisle. "That dress is perfect on you." "Thank you," Grace replied with practiced modesty. "Eddie picked it out." Another lie. Grace had bought that dress 3 weeks ago during one of her mysterious shopping trips that coincided with Derek's lunch breaks. I'd seen the receipt. Pastor Glenn took the pulpit at exactly 10:30, his silver hair gleaming under the sanctuary lights. Glenn was a good man, maybe 60 years old, who genuinely believed in the power of faith to transform lives. He'd married Grace and me 12 years ago, baptized us both, and counseled us through the rough patches that every marriage faces. He had no idea one of his most devoted parishioners was living a double life. "Today I want to talk about honesty," Pastor Glenn began, his voice carrying easily through the sanctuary, "about the courage it takes to live authentically, even when the truth is difficult." Grace shifted beside me, and I caught a flicker of something, guilt, fear, cross her face before she composed herself. Her hand found mine, squeezing gently in what anyone watching would interpret as marital affection. I squeezed back, playing my part in her elaborate deception. "The Bible tells us that the truth will set us free," Pastor Glenn continued. "But first, it might make us very uncomfortable. Truth has a way of exposing the dark corners of our hearts, the places where we hide our shame and our secrets." I felt Grace's grip tighten. Around us, the congregation nodded solemnly, probably thinking about minor sins, gossiping about neighbors, envying someone's new car, skipping prayer before meals. None of them suspected that one of their most respected members was conducting an affair that would scandalize the entire community. After the service, Grace worked the room like a politician at a fundraiser. She hugged the elderly widows, complimented the young mothers on their children, and discussed committee business with the other church ladies. I watched her performance with new eyes, seeing the calculation behind every smile, the careful maintenance of an image that was completely false. "Eddie!" a voice boomed behind me. I turned to see Frank Murphy, my oldest friend, and the closest thing Millbrook had to a town philosopher. Frank owned Murphy's garage and pub, served the best fish and chips in 3 counties, and had never met a secret he couldn't eventually extract from someone. "Frank," I said, genuinely glad to see him. "How's business?" "Can't complain." "Well, I could, but who'd listen?" He grinned, then lowered his voice. "You doing okay, buddy? You look like someone stole your lunch money." Frank had known me since we were kids. We'd grown up 3 streets apart, played baseball together, dated sisters to the same prom. He could read me better than anyone except Grace, and apparently Grace had been too busy reading Derek's text messages to notice her husband's distress. "Just tired," I said. "Been working a lot of overtime." "Uh-huh." Frank's eyes narrowed. "And how's Grace? She seems energetic lately." Before I could answer, the woman in question appeared at my elbow, sliding her arm through mine with practiced ease. "Frank Murphy," she said warmly. "How lovely to see you. You really should come to church more often." "I talk to God plenty," Frank replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Usually when I'm trying to fix whatever Eddie broke at your house." Grace laughed, the sound bright and artificial. "Eddie's very handy. I don't know what I'd do without him. Yeah, Frank said slowly. I bet you don't. There was something in his tone that made Grace's smile falter for just a moment. Frank Murphy might look like a simple mechanic, but he had the instincts of a detective and the patience of a spider. If he suspected something was wrong in my marriage, it wouldn't be long before he started asking uncomfortable questions. We should get going, Grace said, tugging at my arm. I promised Sandy we'd stop by for lunch. Sandy Morrison lived in a house that looked like it had been decorated by someone with more money than taste. Everything matched, everything gleamed, and everything screamed, "Look how successful we are." Sandy herself was Grace's closest friend and biggest competitor, a woman who measured her worth by the size of her husband's paycheck and the envy in other women's eyes. "Grace! Eddie!" Sandy swept us into her foyer like we were visiting royalty. Perfect timing. I just pulled the roast out of the oven. Sandy's husband, Jim, was already at the dining room table, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Jim Morrison, no relation to the dead rock star, as he constantly reminded people, sold insurance with the enthusiasm of a man attending his own funeral. He was decent enough, but Sandy had worn him down over the years until he was more furniture than husband. "So," Sandy said, as she served lunch, "did you hear about Derek Owens? He's doing so well with his real estate business. Sold 3 houses this month alone." Grace's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Really? That's wonderful." "Mm-hmm. And he looks fantastic. Divorce really agreed with him." Sandy's eyes glittered with malicious gossip. His ex-wife, Brenda, is already remarried. To her personal trainer, if you can believe it. Poor Derek was devastated. "How awful," Grace murmured, but I caught the flash of something else in her expression. Satisfaction, possessiveness, whatever it was, it made my stomach turn. "He's been coming to church," Sandy continued. "Pastor Glenn says he's really committed to turning his life around. Finding God after losing everything can do that to a person." "God works in mysterious ways," Grace agreed, her voice steady as stone. I wanted to laugh at the irony. Derek hadn't found God. He'd found my wife. And Grace, who'd spent 12 years lecturing me about Christian values and moral behavior, was helping him sin in the most fundamental way possible. After lunch, we drove home in comfortable silence. Grace hummed softly, probably thinking about her next rendezvous with Derek. I stared at the familiar streets of Millbrook, wondering how long she'd been lying to me, how many people suspected, how much of my life had been built on quicksand. "Eddie?" Grace's voice broke into my thoughts. "Is everything okay? You've been quiet lately." I looked at my wife, really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still the woman who'd caught my eye at a church social 12 years ago. But now I could see the careful calculation behind her concern, the way she monitored my moods like a scientist studying a lab rat. "Just thinking about work," I said. "The Henderson job is more complicated than I expected." "You work too hard," she said, reaching over to pat my knee. "Maybe you should take a vacation. Go fishing with Frank or something." The suggestion was casual, but I heard the subtext. Please leave town so I can spend uninterrupted time with my lover. The audacity of it took my breath away. "Maybe I will," I said. "Maybe I need some time to think about things." Grace smiled and turned back to the window, satisfied that she'd successfully managed another potential problem. She had no idea that her simple husband had been thinking quite a lot lately, and none of those thoughts boded well for her carefully constructed double life. That night, after Grace fell asleep, I sat in my workshop behind the house and planned my next move. I had evidence of her affair, but evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Grace was too smart, too respected in the community. She'd find a way to spin the story, to make herself the victim and me the villain. No, I needed something more devastating than proof. I needed to destroy not just her marriage, but her reputation, her standing in the community, her entire carefully constructed identity. Grace thought she was so clever, playing the devoted wife while sneaking around with Derek Owens. She was about to learn that her simple husband could play games too. And I played for keeps. Rita's coffee corner sat at the intersection of Maine and Elm, like the town's unofficial gossip headquarters. Rita Kowalski had owned the place for 15 years, and in that time she'd perfected the art of extracting secrets from customers while they waited for their caffeine fix. The woman could have worked for the CIA if the CIA needed someone to find out who was sleeping with whom in small-town Maine. I'd been avoiding Rita's for weeks, knowing that my face would give away more than I wanted to reveal. But Tuesday morning found me desperate for decent coffee and human contact that didn't involve my lying wife. Grace had left early for another budget meeting, and the silence in our house had become suffocating. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and Rita looked up from behind the counter with the sharp-eyed attention of a hawk spotting prey. "Eddie Barrow," she said, wiping her hands on a coffee-stained apron. "Haven't seen you in weeks. The usual?" "Large black coffee," I confirmed, settling onto one of the mismatched stools at the counter. Rita's decorating style could charitably be called eclectic: vintage signs, local artwork, and enough plants to qualify as a small jungle. But the coffee was excellent, and the atmosphere was warm enough to make you forget your troubles for a few minutes. "You look like hell," Rita observed with her typical diplomatic skills. "Everything okay at home?" Before I could answer, the door chimed again, and Marge Patterson bustled in with the energy of a woman carrying nuclear-grade gossip. Pastor Glenn's wife was a sweet lady, but she had the town's most active rumor mill running through her kitchen, and she wasn't shy about sharing the latest developments. "Rita! Eddie!" Marge's cheeks were flushed with excitement and the October cold. "Perfect timing. I have the most interesting news." Rita poured coffee without being asked. She knew Marge's order by heart, and leaned forward with predatory interest. "Do tell." "Well?" Marge lowered her voice to what she probably thought was a whisper, but which carried clearly through the small shop. "You know how Derek Owens has been coming to church?" My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Rita nodded encouragingly. "Glenn's been counseling him through his divorce recovery," Marge continued. "Poor man was devastated when his wife left him. But yesterday, Derek came in for his regular appointment and he seemed different, happy, glowing almost." "Glowing?" Rita's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "That's interesting. Glenn asked him about it, in that gentle way of his, and Derek said he'd found someone special, someone who understood him, who appreciated his efforts to become a better man." My grip tightened on the coffee cup until I was surprised it didn't shatter. "Did he say who?" Rita asked, her journalist instincts in full gear. "No, but—" Marge glanced around the shop, making sure we were alone. "Glenn thinks it might be someone from the congregation. Derek kept talking about how this woman was a pillar of the community, someone everyone respected." The coffee in my mouth turned to acid. I forced myself to swallow, to breathe normally, to maintain the facade of casual interest. "Well, good for him," Rita said. "Man deserves some happiness after what he went through." "That's what I told Glenn," Marge agreed. "Although—" She paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. "I do hope whoever it is knows what she's getting into. Derek's got quite a reputation from before he found God." "What kind of reputation?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Marge's eyes lit up. She loved nothing more than an attentive audience for her stories. Oh, the usual bad boy nonsense. Fast cars, faster women, gambling debts. His ex-wife, Brenda, told her sister that Derek had affairs throughout their marriage. Serial cheater, apparently. Couldn't keep it in his pants to save his life. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Grace, who'd spent our entire marriage lecturing me about moral behavior and Christian values, had chosen to have an affair with a man whose reputation for infidelity was apparently legendary. But people can change, Marge added quickly, as if remembering her Christian duty to believe in redemption. Glenn says Derek seems genuinely committed to becoming a better man. Sure, I said. People change all the time. Rita shot me a sharp look. She'd known me long enough to recognize sarcasm when she heard it, and my tone had been bitter enough to curdle cream. You okay, Eddie? She asked. You seem a little tense. Before I could answer, the door chimed again, and my day went from bad to catastrophic. Grace walked in, followed by Sandy Morrison, both women dressed in their professional armor and looking like they owned the world. Eddie! Grace's surprise seemed genuine. What are you doing here? Drinking coffee, I said. It's what people do in coffee shops. Grace's smile flickered at my tone, but she recovered quickly. Of course, I just meant, you usually make coffee at home. Ran out, I lied. We had a full can of coffee in the kitchen, but Grace didn't need to know that. Sandy had been listening to Marge's story with obvious interest. Derek Owens has a girlfriend? How exciting. I wonder who the lucky lady is. Grace's face went pale, then flushed pink. To anyone watching casually, it might have looked like embarrassment at Sandy's gossipy enthusiasm. But I could see the panic in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. We should go, Grace said quickly. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. What meeting? I asked innocently. Budget review, Grace replied without missing a beat. For the Morrison account. Very important. Another lie. Sandy worked at Morrison Insurance too, and she looked genuinely confused by Grace's explanation, but she was too polite to contradict her friend in public, so she just nodded and gathered her things. See you later, Eddie, Grace said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. Her lips were cold, and her perfume, usually subtle, seemed overpowering. Don't wait up tonight. This might run late. After they left, the coffee shop fell silent except for the soft jazz playing through Rita's ancient speakers. Marge was studying her coffee cup with unusual intensity, and Rita was watching me with the focused attention of a woman who sensed a story. Eddie, Rita said carefully, how long have you and Grace been married? 12 years next month, I replied automatically. And things are good? I looked at Rita's concerned face, at Marge's carefully neutral expression, and realized that my poker face wasn't as good as I'd thought. These women had spent decades reading people, extracting secrets, understanding the subtle signs of marital distress. They knew something was wrong. Things are fine, I said, finishing my coffee and standing up. Just fine. But as I walked home through the crisp October air, I couldn't shake the feeling that my secret was becoming less secret by the day. Marge's story about Derek's mystery girlfriend, Grace's panicked reaction, the way Rita had looked at me, it all added up to trouble. That evening, I sat in my workshop and considered my options. I could confront Grace directly, demand the truth, force a showdown that would destroy our marriage in a single explosive moment. But that would give her control of the narrative, let her paint herself as the victim of an unreasonable husband. Or I could be patient. Let Grace dig her own grave deeper while I gathered more evidence, more ammunition. The thought of Derek's reputation for infidelity gave me an idea. If he'd cheated on his ex-wife repeatedly, maybe he was already cheating on Grace. Maybe I could find proof of that. Use it to show Grace exactly what kind of man she'd chosen over her husband. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the plan. Grace thought she was so smart, so careful. She had no idea that her simple husband was about to become her worst nightmare. I opened my laptop and started researching Derek Owens, his business, his habits, his vulnerabilities. If he wanted to play games with my wife, I'd teach him some new rules. Rules where I held all the cards, and the stakes were everything Grace thought she could never lose. Frank Murphy's garage smelled like motor oil, coffee, and the honest sweat of hard work. I'd been coming here since I was 16, first as a customer, then as a friend, and finally as something approaching family. Frank had been the best man at my wedding, had held my head when I got food poisoning from Rita's experimental seafood chowder, and had never once judged me for the choices I'd made or the woman I'd married. Today, I needed his particular brand of wisdom more than ever. "You look like someone ran over your dog," Frank said, without looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. "Except you don't have a dog, so it must be something worse." I settled onto a crate of motor oil and watched Frank work. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, each motion economical and sure. There was something peaceful about watching a master craftsman at work, something that made the chaos in my head settle into manageable patterns. "Grace is having an affair," I said. Frank's hands stilled for exactly 3 seconds, then resumed their work. "You sure?" "Dead sure. Found the evidence. Text messages, hotel receipts, the whole sordid mess." "With who?" "Derek Owens." Now Frank did stop working. He straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, and fixed me with the kind of look that had made bullies reconsider their life choices back in high school. "Derek Owens," he repeated. "That piece of shit who came crawling back to town with his tail between his legs?" "The very same." Frank shook his head slowly. "Jesus, Eddie, I'm sorry. What are you going to do?" It was a good question. I'd been asking myself the same thing for days, running through scenarios that ranged from reasonable to completely insane. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to confront her, get it all out in the open. But Grace is smart," Frank finished. "She'll find a way to make you the bad guy. She's got that whole church lady thing going for her, all those people who think she's some kind of saint." "Exactly. If I go in guns blazing, she'll spin it like I'm some kind of paranoid husband who drove her into another man's arms." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "So you need leverage. Something that makes her the villain instead of the victim." Before I could respond, the garage door chimed, and Tom Bradley walked in. Tom was part of our loose circle of friends, a decent guy who worked construction and played poker with us every other Friday. He looked agitated, his usual easy smile replaced by a grim expression. "Frank, Eddie," he nodded to us both. "Glad you're here. I need to talk to somebody about this." "About what?" Frank asked. Tom glanced around the garage, making sure we were alone. "About Grace and Derek Owens." My blood turned to ice water. "What about them?" "I saw them together yesterday," Tom said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "At the Riverside Motel, out on Route 9. I was driving back from the Jameson job site and I saw Grace's car in the parking lot. Thought maybe she'd broken down or something, so I pulled in to help." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "That's when I saw them. Grace and Derek, coming out of room 12. She was fixing her hair, you know, and he had his arm around her waist. Real cozy." The words hit me like physical blows. Hearing about Grace's affair in the abstract was one thing. Seeing evidence on her phone, finding receipts, putting together the pieces. But having someone I trusted confirm that he'd seen my wife with another man made it brutally, undeniably real. "Shit," Frank muttered. "Eddie, I'm sorry, man." Tom looked miserable. "I didn't know what to do. I mean, Grace has always been, she acts like she's better than the rest of us. But she's still Eddie's wife. I couldn't just ignore it." "You did the right thing," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Did I?" Tom shook his head. "Because now I feel like I'm breaking up a marriage." "The marriage was already broken," Frank said grimly. "You're just delivering the news." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, 3 middle-aged men grappling with the messy realities of adultery and friendship. Finally, Tom spoke again. "There's something else. When I saw them at the motel, Derek saw me too. He said something to Grace and they both looked right at me. Grace looked scared. But Derek? He smiled and waved like he was proud of being seen. That detail hit me harder than anything else. Derek wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was flaunting it, enjoying the risk, maybe even hoping to get caught. It suggested a level of arrogance and cruelty that made my hands clench into fists. "What are you thinking, Eddie?" Frank asked quietly. I was thinking about a lot of things. About 12 years of marriage that had apparently meant nothing to Grace. About Derek's reputation for infidelity, and how he was probably laughing at both me and my wife. About the way Grace kissed my cheek every morning while planning her next betrayal. But mostly, I was thinking about revenge. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that Grace and Derek have no idea what they've started." Frank's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Grace thinks she's so smart, so careful. She's got her perfect reputation, her standing in the community, all these people who think she's some kind of moral authority, and Derek's playing the reformed bad boy, trying to rebuild his image after his divorce." "Yeah? What if their secrets became public knowledge? What if everyone in town knew exactly what kind of people they really are?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "Eddie, I don't know if that's such a good idea. I mean, yeah, what they're doing is wrong, but public humiliation is exactly what they deserve," I finished. "Grace has spent 12 years lecturing me about Christian values while she was planning to betray everything we built together. Derek's been playing the repentant sinner while he was seducing another man's wife. They want to act like they're better than everyone else? Let's see how they handle being exposed as hypocrites." Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the intensity of a man reading a complex blueprint. "You're not talking about just telling people," he said finally. "You're talking about something bigger." "I'm talking about justice," I said. "Grace wants to destroy our marriage? Fine, but she's going to pay the price for it. They both are." Tom shifted nervously. "Eddie, you're scaring me a little. You're not talking about doing anything illegal, are you?" "Nothing illegal," I assured him, "but nothing gentle either. Grace and Derek want to play games with people's lives. I'm going to teach them that some games have consequences." Frank nodded slowly. "What do you need?" The question surprised me. I'd expected arguments, attempts to talk me out of whatever I was planning. Instead, Frank was offering to help, no questions asked. "I need proof," I said. "More than what I already have. I need evidence that's so overwhelming, so undeniable that Grace can't spin her way out of it." "I can help with that," Tom said quietly. "I mean, if you're sure this is what you want to do." "It is." "Then I know where they meet. When they meet. Derek's not exactly subtle about it." Over the next hour, we planned what Frank called Operation Exposure. Tom would document Grace and Derek's meetings, providing photographic evidence of their affair. Frank would help me research Derek's business dealings, looking for anything that might give us additional leverage. And I would continue playing the oblivious husband while gathering intelligence from Grace herself. It wasn't a complicated plan, but it was thorough. By the time we were finished, Grace's perfect reputation would be in ruins, Derek's carefully constructed comeback would be over, and everyone in Millbrook would know exactly what kind of people they really were. "You sure about this, Eddie?" Frank asked as we prepared to leave. "Once we start down this road, there's no going back." I thought about Grace's lies, about Derek's arrogant smile, about 12 years of marriage that had apparently meant nothing to the woman I'd trusted with my heart. "I'm sure," I said. "They started this war. I'm going to finish it." As I drove home through the darkening streets of Millbrook, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not for my marriage. That was already dead, killed by Grace's betrayal and buried by her lies. But hope for justice, for consequences, for a reckoning that would show Grace and Derek that actions have prices. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. The game was just beginning, and this time I was going to win. The photographs Tom brought me were devastating in their clarity. Grace and Derek entering the Riverside Motel, Grace and Derek kissing in the parking lot of Romano's restaurant. Derek's hand on my wife's ass as they walked into his apartment building on Maple Street. Each image was a knife twist, but they were also ammunition in a war I was finally ready to fight. "These are good," I told Tom, spreading the photos across my workshop table like a general studying battle plans. "Really good. When did you take this one?" Tom pointed to a particularly damning shot of Grace and Derek in an intimate embrace outside his apartment. "Yesterday afternoon. She told you she was at that women's auxiliary meeting, right?" "Right." I'd sat through Grace's detailed description of the meeting over dinner, listening to her lie with the practiced ease of a professional con artist. She'd even mentioned specific details: what cookies Marge had brought, which hymns they'd discussed for the Christmas service, how concerned everyone was about the church roof fund. All lies. While I'd been believing her performance, she'd been in Derek's bed, doing things with him that she hadn't done with me in years. Frank walked in carrying coffee and wearing the grim expression of a man bearing bad news. "I've got some information about Derek's business dealings. You're not going to like it." "Tell me." "He's been using his real estate connections to launder money for some out-of-state investors. Nothing the FBI would care about, but definitely shady enough to damage his reputation if it became public knowledge." "How shady?" "Inflated property values, fake inspection reports, bribing city officials to overlook zoning violations, the usual small-time corruption that keeps guys like Derek in expensive cars and cheap suits." I studied the financial documents Frank had somehow acquired. This could destroy his business. That's the idea, isn't it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of that "love you" made my stomach turn. Grace was probably already at Derek's apartment, planning another night of betrayal while texting loving lies to her husband. "She's with him now," I said, showing Frank and Tom the message. Tom nodded. "Derek's car is in his driveway. I drove by on my way here." "Perfect." I gathered the photographs and financial documents into a neat pile. "Time to start phase 2. Which is? Letting the right people know what kind of woman Grace really is." The next morning, I arrived at Rita's coffee corner with a manila envelope and a carefully rehearsed story. Rita was behind the counter as usual, dispensing caffeine and collecting gossip with equal efficiency. "Eddie," she called out when she saw me. "2 days in a row. I'm honored." "Morning, Rita. Large black coffee and—" I hesitated, as if struggling with a difficult decision. "Maybe some advice?" Rita's eyes sharpened with interest. "Advice is free. Coffee's $3.50. I paid for the coffee and settled onto my usual stool, making sure the manila envelope was visible but not obvious. Rita's eyes flicked to it several times as she prepared my drink. "So," she said, sliding the coffee across the counter, "what's troubling you?" "It's about Grace," I said, letting genuine pain color my voice. I think she might be having an affair." Rita's expression shifted from casual interest to laser focus. "What makes you think that?" "Little things at first. She's been working late a lot, taking weekend trips to visit her sister, spending money on clothes and other things. But yesterday, I opened the envelope and pulled out one of the less explicit photographs. Grace and Derek holding hands in the restaurant parking lot. "Jesus Christ," Rita whispered, studying the image. "Is that Derek Owens?" "Yeah, I hired a private investigator," I lied smoothly. "Thought I was being paranoid, but—" Rita examined the photograph with the intensity of a forensic expert. "Eddie, I'm so sorry. This must be devastating." "The worst part is the lying," I said. "All those church meetings, all that talk about Christian values and moral behavior. She's been lecturing me about honesty while she was sneaking around with him." "Have you confronted her?" "Not yet. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I mean, Grace has such a reputation in this town. Everyone thinks she's this perfect Christian woman. If this gets out, it'll destroy her." Rita finished. Yeah, and maybe that's what she deserves, but I let the sentence hang, playing the role of the conflicted husband who still loved his cheating wife. Rita bought it completely, her expression softening with sympathy. You're a good man, Eddie Barrow, she said. Better than she deserves. Within 2 hours, half the town knew about Grace's affair. Rita's coffee shop was the epicenter of Millbrook's gossip network, and news this juicy spread faster than wildfire. By lunchtime, I was getting sympathetic looks from people I barely knew and concerned phone calls from friends who'd heard various versions of the story. The best call came from Marge Patterson. Eddie, she said, her voice heavy with Christian concern. I heard about Grace. I'm so sorry. Thanks, Marge. It's been difficult. I can't believe it. Grace always seemed so devoted to you, so committed to her faith. To think she'd throw it all away for that man. You know Derek pretty well? I asked innocently. Well enough. Glenn's been counseling him, trying to help him rebuild his life after his divorce. But now... Eddie, I have to tell you something. Derek's been asking a lot of questions about the church's finances, about who handles the money, who has access to the accounts. This was news to me. Really? Glenn mentioned it to me just last week. Said Derek seemed very interested in joining the finance committee, maybe taking over some of the bookkeeping responsibilities. At the time, we thought it showed how committed he was to the church. But now it looks suspicious. Exactly. A man with his background suddenly interested in church finances and having an affair with Grace, who handles the women's auxiliary budget. The implications were staggering. If Derek was planning to embezzle money from the church, and Grace was helping him, that would be a scandal that destroyed more than just their reputations. It would devastate the entire congregation. Marge, I said carefully, maybe you should mention this to Pastor Glenn, just in case. I already have. He's going to review all the financial records, make sure everything's in order, and Eddie, we're going to be praying for you. This whole situation is just heartbreaking. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and marveled at how quickly things were spiraling out of Grace's control. She thought she was so smart, so careful, but she'd made a fundamental mistake. She'd underestimated the power of small-town gossip and the consequences of betraying people who trusted her. My phone rang again. This time it was Sandy Morrison, and she sounded frantic. Eddie, I just heard about Grace and Derek. Please tell me it's not true. I wish I could, I said sadly. But she's my best friend. She never said anything about being unhappy in her marriage, never mentioned Derek except in passing. How could she do this? I don't know, Sandy. I really don't. And Derek. I can't believe I thought he was genuinely reformed. The whole time he was... God, Eddie, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Just be a friend, I said. That's all anyone can do. But Sandy's call gave me an idea for phase 3 of my plan. If Grace's best friend was already turning against her, it wouldn't take much to complete her social destruction. That evening, Grace came home from work, looking haggard and defensive. She'd obviously heard the rumors, seen the looks, felt the shift in how people treated her, but she was still trying to maintain the facade, still playing the role of the wronged wife. Eddie, she said as soon as she walked in the door, we need to talk. About what? About these horrible rumors that are going around town. People are saying I'm having an affair, and I know you must be hearing them too. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The woman I'd married would never have been able to lie so smoothly, so convincingly. This Grace was someone else entirely, someone who could look me in the eye and deny reality with absolute conviction. Are they true? I asked quietly. Of course not. Eddie, how can you even ask me that? We're married. We took vows. I would never betray you like that. She was good, I had to admit. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed her. Grace had always been a skilled manipulator, but desperation had sharpened her abilities to a razor's edge. "Then where were you last night?" I asked. "When you were supposedly working late?" "At the office, just like I told you. We're preparing for the annual audit, and there's so much paperwork to review." Another lie. Tom had photographed her entering Derek's apartment at 7:30 and leaving at midnight. But I didn't reveal that information. Not yet. "Okay," I said. "I believe you." Grace's relief was visible. She thought she'd successfully managed another crisis, convinced her simple husband to ignore the evidence of his own eyes. "Thank you," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that had been on Derek's body just hours before. "I knew you'd trust me over some malicious gossip." That night, as Grace slept beside me, I finalized my plans for her complete destruction. She'd had her chance to tell the truth, to show some remorse, to salvage what was left of our marriage. Instead, she'd chosen to double down on her lies, to treat me like I was too stupid to see what was happening right in front of me. Tomorrow, the entire town would see exactly what kind of woman Grace really was. And Derek would learn that some men's wives aren't as easy to steal as he'd thought. The endgame was about to begin, and this time, there would be no mercy. Sunday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Maine can provide. Grace spent extra time getting ready for church, applying her makeup with the precision of a woman preparing for battle. She'd chosen her most conservative dress, her most modest jewelry, her most innocent expression. She had no idea she was dressing for her own funeral. "You look beautiful," I told her, as we prepared to leave, and for once, I meant it. Grace did look beautiful, like a perfectly crafted mask designed to hide the rot underneath. "Thank you," she replied, adjusting her pearls one final time. "I know people are talking, Eddie, but I want them to see that we're strong, that our marriage can survive some malicious gossip." "Of course," I agreed. "We'll show them exactly what kind of people we are." The drive to First Methodist was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Grace was probably planning her performance, rehearsing the role of the wrongfully accused wife. I was thinking about the envelope in my jacket pocket and the conversation I'd had with Pastor Glenn the night before. "Glenn," I'd said when he answered his phone, "I need to talk to you about Grace and Derek, and about the church finances." "Eddie, I'm so sorry about what you're going through. This must be incredibly difficult." "It is, but there's something else you need to know. I think Derek's been using Grace to get information about the church's money." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "What kind of information?" Glenn finally asked. "Account numbers, authorization procedures, who has access to what. Grace handles the women's auxiliary budget, and Derek's been asking her a lot of questions about how the church manages its finances." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Derek had shown unusual interest in the church's operations, and Grace did have access to certain financial information. The fact that they were having an affair made any connection between those two facts seem sinister. "Glenn, I think they're planning to steal money from the church." "That's a serious accusation, Eddie." "I know, and I hope I'm wrong, but given everything else that's been happening—" "I'll look into it," Glenn promised. "And Eddie, I want you to know that whatever happens, you have the church's full support." Now, as we pulled into the church parking lot, I could see the results of that conversation. Glenn's car was there, along with Marge's, and several other vehicles belonging to the church board members. They'd obviously arrived early for an emergency meeting. Grace noticed too. "I wonder what's going on," she said, frowning at the unusual activity. "Probably just normal church business," I replied innocently. We walked into the sanctuary together, and I felt the weight of every eye in the building. The congregation was buzzing with whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when people saw us. Grace lifted her chin defiantly, playing the role of the dignified woman facing down false accusations. Derek was sitting in the back row, looking uncomfortable, but defiant. When he saw Grace, his face lit up with what might have been love or might have been simple lust. Grace's step faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly and took our usual seat in the third row. Pastor Glenn entered from the side door, his expression grave. Behind him came Marge, Sandy Morrison, and 3 members of the church board. They took seats in the front row, facing the congregation like a tribunal. "Before we begin our regular service," Glenn announced, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, "the board has asked me to address some serious concerns that have come to our attention." Grace's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. I could feel her trembling. "It has been brought to our attention," Glenn continued, "that there may have been some inappropriate conduct involving members of our congregation, conduct that violates not only our moral teachings, but potentially our legal obligations as well." The sanctuary was dead silent. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "Specifically, we have received evidence of an extramarital affair between 2 members of our church family. This affair has been going on for several months, involving deception, betrayal of marriage vows, and potentially misuse of church resources." Grace's grip on my hand was now painful. I could see Derek shifting uncomfortably in the back row. "Grace Barrow and Derek Owens," Glenn said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Please stand." The sound that came from Grace might have been a gasp or might have been a sob. She released my hand and stood slowly, her face pale as death. Derek remained seated for a moment, then rose reluctantly. "We have photographic evidence of your affair," Glenn continued, producing a manila envelope from the pulpit. "We have financial records showing suspicious transactions involving church funds, and we have testimony from multiple witnesses confirming your deception." "This is ridiculous," Derek called out, his voice cracking slightly. "You can't put people on trial in church." "We're not putting anyone on trial," Glenn replied calmly. "We're simply addressing behavior that affects our entire community, behavior that violates the sacred trust we place in our members." Grace finally found her voice. "Pastor Glenn, I don't know what lies you've been told, but are you denying that you've been having an affair with Derek Owens?" Glenn interrupted. The question hung in the air like a sword. Grace looked around the sanctuary, seeing the faces of people who had trusted her, respected her, looked up to her as a moral authority. Every eye was on her, waiting for an answer. She began, then stopped. "Are you denying that you used your access to church financial information to help Derek plan the theft of church funds?" Glenn pressed. "What?" Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "No, that's not—" But the damage was done. Even if the financial accusations were exaggerated, the affair was undeniable, and the congregation could see Grace's guilt written across her face. Derek tried to salvage the situation. "Look, Grace and we fell in love. It wasn't planned, it just happened. But we never stole anything from the church." "Then you admit to the affair?" Glenn asked. Derek's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, we admit it." The sound that went through the congregation was like air being sucked out of the room. Grace swayed on her feet, and for a moment I thought she might faint. "In that case," Glenn said, "the board has voted to revoke your membership in this church, effective immediately. You are no longer welcome at our services, our events, or our property." Grace's carefully constructed world crumbled in that moment. Her reputation, her social standing, her identity as a pillar of the community, all of it destroyed by her own choices and Derek's cowardice. "Eddie," she turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Please, tell them this is all a mistake." I stood slowly, looking at my wife with what I hoped appeared to be profound sadness rather than satisfaction. "I can't do that, Grace," I said quietly, Because it's not a mistake. It's the truth. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Grace sobbed in the passenger seat, her careful makeup ruined, her perfect facade finally shattered. She kept trying to explain, to justify, to somehow make me understand that the affair didn't mean she didn't love me. But I wasn't listening anymore. The woman sitting next to me wasn't my wife. She was a stranger who had worn my wife's face while betraying everything we'd built together. "What happens now?" she asked as we pulled into our driveway. I looked at our house, our life, our shared history, and felt nothing but relief that it was finally over. "Now you pack your things," I said, "and you leave." "Eddie, please." "The divorce papers are on the kitchen table," I continued. "I'm keeping the house, the car, and what's left of my self-respect. You can have whatever Derek's willing to give you." Grace stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "You planned this. All of it. The rumors, the church confrontation, everything." "You planned it," I corrected her. "I just made sure there were consequences." That evening, after Grace had packed her belongings and left for Derek's apartment, I sat on my back porch with a beer and watched the sun set over Millbrook. Frank Murphy joined me, carrying his own beer and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd seen justice served. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said. "For the first time in months, I feel free." "Think they'll stay together? Grace and Derek?" I considered the question. Derek had already shown his true colors by throwing Grace under the bus at the first sign of trouble. Grace had destroyed her reputation and her marriage for a man who wouldn't even defend her when it mattered. "Give it 6 months," I said. "Maybe less. Derek's already looking for his next conquest, and Grace is about to learn what it's like to be with a man who has no respect for marriage vows." Frank raised his beer in a toast. "To consequences." "To consequences," I agreed. 6 weeks later, Derek left town without warning, leaving Grace with nothing but unpaid bills and a reputation that would follow her for the rest of her life. She moved to Portland, where nobody knew her story, and took a job that paid half what she'd made at Morrison Insurance. I heard through Rita's gossip network that she'd tried to contact me several times, wanting to apologize, to explain, to somehow repair what she'd destroyed. But I never answered her calls. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. The house felt different without Grace's presence, cleaner somehow, more honest. I kept the rooms exactly as they were, not as a shrine to our failed marriage, but as a reminder of what deception could cost. On quiet Sunday mornings, I still went to First Methodist, where Pastor Glenn preached about forgiveness and redemption. The congregation welcomed me with the warmth reserved for survivors of great tragedies, and I accepted their sympathy with appropriate grace. But late at night, when the house was dark and silent, I allowed myself to smile at the memory of Grace's face when her world collapsed. She'd thought she was so clever, so careful, so untouchable. She'd learned otherwise, and in a small town like Millbrook, some lessons last forever.